Is she open?
Okay, good morning members to Fáilte Row Lig. We have quorum and I now call the meeting to order and welcome all members to the 74th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I remind members about the protocol regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate your Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings and be aware of the cameras when using the tablet device. I would also like to remind you once again about the sensitivity of the microphones. And for any members who may be joining by Zoom, please be mindful of cameras and background images. Agenda item 1 then, members, declaration of interest. I remind members of responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to today's agenda items? Andy?
Charity Trustee, Trade Union Member and Private Sector Landlord Chair.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. Marisa then, Morris.
Charity, belong to the charity Conlon Gaeilge, a registered with Conlon Gaeilge.
Yeah. Thank you, Morris.
Member of the Korean District League, North West Football Association, Harry Gregg Foundation, IFA, Friends of Korean.
Yeah.
That's all I can remember.
I'll also declare that I'm a charity trustee as well. Anything else, members? No? Okay, members, moving to agenda item 2, apologies. Are members aware of any apologies? No. Clerk? No. Thank you. Agenda item 3, members, Chairperson's business. I don't have anything in particular to draw to the attention of the committee this week, other than to state that I note the 2 debates scheduled for next week in relation to the budget. The SSE and VOA motions scheduled in plenary for a week commencing 23rd. The committee is scheduled to receive an update from finance officials from NDFC next week. So, as we won't have any opportunity for committee to reach a position in advance of the debates, I would intend to reflect concerns that the committee has heard and where we as a committee understand the department's pressures exist, if members are content with that approach.
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 4, members, is draft minutes. Draft minutes from the meeting on 12th of February are at your pack there. Can I ask if members are any edits or amendments to the draft minutes? Yes, Kelly?
Sorry, could I get a wee amendment? It's under declarations of interest. I didn't attend the cricket summer camp.
Okay, members content with.
Yeah, we'll get that amended. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other issues, members? Otherwise, content to go ahead, Andy?
Same for me, Chair. It was that I'd met with Cricket Ireland was the declaration.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so can we approve those as amended?
We'll get them amended.
Get them amended, okay. Thank you, Clerk. Thank you. Okay, members, moving on to matters arising then. Members, you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 20. As usual, I'd ask for comments and would request you use the reference number if you want to make comment in relation to a specific item. We'll start with item 5.2, which is a clerk's memo in relation to this committee's deferral last week in relation to the Minister's request to ring-fence funding for social housing development programme. Members, after a division, we agreed last week to defer a decision for 1 week to allow for additional information to be obtained from the department. Further information was received from the department on Tuesday afternoon and can be found at item 5.10 on pages 10 to 13 of the table of papers. It appears that we were in fact direct to await the further information, and I welcome the clarification of the ask by the Minister. I note the Minister is now referring to the earmarking of funds rather than ring fencing, which may allay some members' concerns. For the avoidance of doubt, and by way of a reminder of all the very many times that we have indicated support for increasing the building of social homes, I ask the team here to track back how many times we have written and to whom in support of development and building of social homes. So, as recently, members, last week the committee wrote to FMDFM in support of the prioritisation of social home building. For the avoidance of doubt, the committee has been consistent, persistent and loud in our support of the need for social homes and the prioritisation of home building within the programme for government, with 55 actions to date, including the following: written to the Executive 3 times, the Housing Executive 9 times, Head of Civil Service in relation to the cross-cutting nature of the housing supply strategy. Infrastructure, 5 times regarding wastewater, infrastructure and housing, and other bodies such as NIFA, housing associations, Construction Employers Federation and NI Water. So last week's agreed letter was sent yesterday to FMDFM seeking their support for social homes to be prioritised. However, if members are content, I suggest that we write to the Executive Minister to reiterate our support for Programme for Government targets, including housing targets, and any meaningful efforts by the Minister to achieve them, acknowledges the reality of the budget which the Exec and all departments are facing, and calls on the Minister to work constructively with the Minister for Finance to deliver a multi-year budget which would allow us to plan investment in public services, including social housing, for years to come. Would members be content?
Agreed.
Thank you. Go ahead, Pam.
Chair, could I ask that we appreciate your proposal? Could I propose that we take it back a step to a more basic version of what I'd asked for last week? That would be that this committee write to the Executive to support the ring fencing or earmarking of the full funding requirements of the social housing development programme, which reflect the Executive's own housing commitments as expressed both in its programme for government and in its housing supply strategy.
Okay, so can I take members' thoughts then in relation to the more substantive approach, given the amount of times that we have written? But what are members' thoughts? Yes, Cathy.
Sure, I'm happy to go with what you have proposed there. I think it's actually stronger and actually includes more detail, always around the budget and stuff as well.
And I would appreciate just exactly the same, that I think that what in fact you have done there is much more inclusive in every respect, and it's acknowledging the very fact that we are probably embracing the need for the 3-year budget and that as well too. So,
Thank you, Kelly and Sean. Andy, yeah.
Yeah, Chair, can I just check procedurally? As I understood it last week, our agreement was Pam had put forward a proposal and we voted, but it was agreed that that proposal would be deferred to this week to allow further information. So that's a standing proposal, wasn't it? It was proposed and seconded by Pam and Morris. So what way does that align to there now being 2 proposals?
Yeah, so I'll take that on board now in a second. I'll just check with Morris there.
Yeah, Chair, thanks very much. But I seconded Pam's proposal last week, and I stand by because it's more specific rather than broad-based, and I would like it to be targeted at social housing.
And what element of that proposal there would concern you in relation to the multi-year budget?
Which one?
The proposal, my more expansive one.
Broad, and it doesn't drill down into the need that we need to really emphasise on social housing, because that's something that's needed right across the country, not just in any
specifically references housing targets, but I will check with the clerk around the procedural issue that Andy has raised.
Chair, and thank you. I just think given that the Executive and all the parties in the Executive have endorsed the housing supply strategy, and I think and the programme for government commitment to build these houses, I think in order to fulfil that commitment, the programme for government, I think it would be a good thing for us to be supportive and making sure that we're very clear with that to the Executive.
Mark's struggling, I think, to get into the meeting there. If somebody to check that. It's been a message. So just to say, what I have suggested is we write to the Executive to reiterate our support for programme for government targets. Reiterate our support, so that's very clear. And so I'll go up to Sean first. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Again, I think that we have been very clear. I think whenever you go through how much engagement we've had across all executive departments around this, I have no problem with saying that we have a priority for social housing. No problem with saying it. You know, we've talked about it enough in this committee. But regardless of what we do, ring fencing is up to the executive. So do I get to come into the committee and say, I think that we need to ring fence millions of pounds for an anti-poverty strategy because that's my priority, that's my way of thinking that we move the most vulnerable out of destitution? We could agree that as a committee, but it doesn't mean that the Minister for Finance will actually ring fence any money. So that's where I am with this.
Okay, so I just want to get bring Mark. I'm conscious Mark has joined us there, so just want to let you know, Mark, that I have suggested there in relation to the deferred item that we deferred from last week, and in light of the fact we have received further information from the Minister, including reference to earmarking, that we write to Executive and Minister to reiterate our support for PFG targets, including housing targets, and any meaningful efforts from the Minister to achieve them, acknowledges the reality of the budget which the Executive and all departments are facing, and calls the Ministers to work constructively, the Minister with the Minister for Finance to deliver a multi-year budget which would allow us to plan investment in public services, including social housing, for years to come. So just to bring you up to speed on that. So Pam, you're looking in again there. Do you want to clarify, Clerk, the wording?
I would just need the wording of the proposal.
Yeah, so that this committee write to the Executive to support the ring fencing or earmarking of the full funding requirements of the Social Housing Development Programme, which reflect the Executive's own housing commitments as expressed both in its programme for government and in its housing supply strategy.
I need to get the wording of that. Could you email me it?
Yeah, I can, yes.
Yeah, just in case we need to. They're similar but different proposals.
Yeah.
If you want, you can take it to the vote. They just, if I can refer members just to page 25 of the pack, that was the summary of last week's meeting, and it was agreed following the division that the matter would be brought back for a committee decision today following the receipt of more information. So it's for the committee today.
Yeah, so it was contingent upon getting that further information, which we have now got, and which, you know, I think we're happy to reiterate our support for those targets. That's very, very clear.
Sure.
I'm coming to Melissa first, Andy. Sorry, Melissa then Andy.
Chair, I have to say to you, quite honestly, that I think there's a gap, a very difference between earmarking and ring fencing. It's two very, very different concepts in every respect. And to pretend that they're both the same in the one, I don't think that's correct, you know.
Chair,
Sorry, Pam, of Andy first.
I was just on that point.
I'll take Andy first.
Just my only concern with the proposal you put forward, Chair, and in earnest, obviously it is recognising the challenges we have, but it stops short of saying that the funding allocated, the capital funding allocated, as highlighted by the Minister in his response on their tabled papers, is nearly 50% short of what's needed to deliver on the PFG. So we can say, you know, categorically we support the PFG, etc. But if we don't say about the funding, that's a fundamental failure in my eyes, because the funding is not being allocated at the start of the year to allow that planning to be taken forward, and it's being done in year. So I think personally we need to say more around that, and that's where the ring fencing comes in.
Okay, Pam.
Yeah, and I would wholly agree with Andy there. Clearly the draft budget is it's under 50% of the funding that is needed for that plan for the housing. So clearly it's not sufficient and it won't deliver. So no matter how we support it, if we don't support the Minister and the Department in actually calling for that funding to be earmarked, then the houses will not be delivered if the money's not there.
And there are other, like for example, within education, we've been told about a 250 million shortfall. So I don't think we can ignore those realities. That's a DUP department as well. I don't think we can ignore those realities. And I think this approach does reflect our continued focus on housing. It reiterates our support for the targets. So I'm checking his Mark online or not there, because I know there has been some.
He's struggling again. I think.
Been in and out there. So I just wanted to double check. Have we got a stable connection to him, or where we are now?
Sorry, Chair, I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that.
Okay, so Morris, go ahead.
Just to pick up a point Melissa said there, we're not actually, if I read Pam's proposal correctly, we're not actually asking for ring fenced. We're asking for ring fenced or earmarked, and I do think it's vital. And it's not just the two DUP ministers' departments that are under pressure. Budget-wise, it's all departments that are under pressure.
Absolutely.
So,
and that's absolutely part of my concern. And so, can I just check then, Clerk? Do we have two clear proposals at this stage?
Yeah, there are two clear proposals. I'll ask the member to put the wording for you. I don't have the wording of one, but you can take one and put it to the vote, and then take the other and put it to the vote.
Okay, and do we need a break to get the wording, or can Pam give us the wording?
I'm going to send it to him right now.
So do you want to take this one first?
So can you?
Pam Cameron's one first?
Yeah, so we'll take Pam's proposal first. So can you read Pam's proposal, please?
Yes, that this committee write to the executives to support the ring fencing stroke earmarking of the full funding requirements of the social housing development programme, which reflect the executive's own housing commitments as expressed both in its programme for government and its housing supply strategy.
All those in favour?
Could I ask, can we amend that?
In what way?
It's hard because we don't have it in front of us, but I'm just thinking bringing both together because didn't your one say something about to work with the minister or the
Yeah, do you want me to, so write to executive and minister to reiterate our support for programme for government targets, including housing targets, and any meaningful efforts from the minister to achieve them, acknowledges the reality of the budget which the executive and all departments are facing, and calls the minister to work constructively with the Minister for Finance to deliver a multi-year budget which would allow us to plan investment in public services, including social housing, for years to come.
What about if we added in there, just keep me right, sorry, hold on, I'm trying to think the both of them together. Something about like the earmarking and ring fencing, it's not for a committee of the Assembly to, we can have an opinion on that certainly, but it'll have absolutely no bearing on the discussions that happen within the executive because it's the executive's decision. But I'm just thinking, is there something there about working with the Minister for Finance to secure funding?
To work constructively with the Minister for Finance to deliver a multi-year budget, I have suggested.
But it's bringing in Pam's point about the money side of things. It's to work with, because if
Is that what you feel is lacking from the second?
yeah,
It's
is it the money?
The money.
So, through the chair, I think Andy's point is right. I think unless we're addressing that finance point of it, we can support all we want, but unless the money is there to actually build the homes, I think that's why it's really important. I understand this committee can't make the executive do anything, but the executive have already indicated their support through the programme for government and the housing supply strategy. So I think this is not in any way harmful. I think this is a supportive measure, and I think it would be a good thing to go to the executive for that reason. I think if we're serious about needing, and we know the consequences of not building these houses, they need to be built.
My only concern in that would be we could give our minister £1 billion and he couldn't build those houses because the infrastructure's not in place. I have a closed area in Newton Ards now where nothing new can be built, no new connections. So if there's need there, that can't be happening. I think that the identified level of funding requirement for social housing is something that needs to be put forward to the Minister for Finance.
Again,
So listen, well, go ahead, Pam.
just again through the chair, I think the Minister was clear in his response around capacity. He answered those questions, and it's very clear that the targets have always been met apart from the COVID years for understandable reasons. So there would be no risk to this, and should there be any risk, the monies would then return to the executive. But I think without that forward planning, without them knowing that money's there, then that's where the risk is, and not being able to build them if the money arrives late in the day. So I think that is the real risk. So I think in terms of house building, they need as much forward planning as possible.
I want to bring Mark in then and see can we then plot a way forward on this. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for that disruption. I missed some of the discussion there, unfortunately, but from what I've gathered, some members are saying that a letter from us won't have a bearing on an ultimate executive decision. But we shouldn't let that executive situation have a bearing on our position. And what we should be asking ourselves is, do we want to see these houses built? A programme for government has come forward with targets in it. That's been supported by parties around the table here. Do we want to see that delivered? Yes. Can that be delivered without the required finance? No. So I have no problem at all calling for the earmarking or ring fencing of the money to make that reality a reality. Whether or not it becomes a reality is ultimately up to the executive. But I mean, we as a committee have spent so much time talking about social housing, the need for more. I think it's sensible enough, and we should be looking at the proposal rather than where it's coming from.
So if we were to merge the proposal so that everyone was content with it, would members be content that I asked the clerk to take a look at that rather than doing it now that the clerk come back with a merged proposal, which we then consider? Members content?
I would prefer to just move on my proposal. It was brought back from last week. I appreciate Mark's comments there. I think it is sensible, and I think it's better that it's plain English and as brief as possible as well.
And again, Pam, what is it about the other? Why does it need to be so brief?
It's to the point. It's a clear ask. We're supportive of the programme for government commitment and housing supplies strategy. We want to see these built, and they won't be built without the funding. So that's what we need to support as a committee.
Sure, I can't understand what the difficulty is with this proposal that you set out. It clearly mentions programme for government targets. It clearly mentions housing targets. It clearly mentions the ministers working together to deliver it. And in fact, it actually mentions just social housing more than the other one does. So I can't understand.
Chair, mine's more concise and to the point, I would suggest.
Yeah, Chair, I would agree with Pam. It is more concise and to the point, and we're asking for money to be set aside for social housing. Whether we get it or not, as Mark has alluded to, is a different matter. But at least we're asking for a specific thing, for a specific project, should the Minister be able to deliver. But again, it's down to the Executive whether they can provide the money or not. But I don't see any harm in us actually asking for it to be ring-fenced or earmarked, either or.
Andy?
Yeah, Chair, I think for me, the differences in the two proposals is you're stopped short of saying the funding needs to be allocated. It does recognise the issue, it does allude to the programme for government, but it leaves that nuance in there of, you know, the finance, and I think that's the comparable differences for me. But I think we do need to draw a line in this. We all support social housing delivery, we all want to see it delivered, but fundamentally I'm sure people out there are looking at this committee, raising their eyebrows and going, you know, they can't even come to a consensus on these things.
Chair, I am uncomfortable a wee bit with the ring-fenced element. Fine with earmarked. Can we just do both? And then that way at least we have the follow-up and the in terms of the fullness of your proposal, and we go forward then with, I am more comfortable, and I will say it in terms of the earmark, but if the or earmarked is in the original proposal, can we just do both so we can move on?
Checking with the clerk, is that potentially possible to just do
Write
both?
one single letter and put both commitments in it, or write two letters?
Whatever we can do to move this on.
Yeah, I need to move
at this
on.
point.
So,
Chair,
I'll come to Lisa and then I'll come to Pam.
Yeah, again, too, I know you might think that I'm dancing on the head of a pin here, but I spent a lot of time on procedures, and I've heard people debate the very small word may or must, and the difference in the two of them in terms of where one is obliged to do something as opposed to where people may do something. Now, I think the same thing applies here whenever we talk about something being earmarked or ring-fenced. Now, we can ask for the sun, the moon and the stars, but let's face up to reality as well too. We do know what it is that is there at the present time, what it is that we're all confronted with in relation to the budget and the likes of it, in which we have full and absolute commitment to the housing strategy and so on. We have to take that on board, and I think that is encompassed within your proposal, Chair.
And the most recent letter does say earmarked. Pam?
Chair, would the committee be content if we just said earmarked and not ring fenced? Is that a better word? Yeah? Okay. I'd be very content with that. I think it's just important that, let's be clear about this. Unless we're calling for the finances to be made available, the houses won't be built. That's the reality. And I think this committee all supports the building of houses. We know that the executive supports the building of these houses. So I think it's a good thing that we should be supporting the executive and the minister and the department to build these houses.
So are members content with that? Can I?
Yes, I'm content with that. Can I just say this committee has been very clear with the department over the years when it comes to underspends, that if it looks as if this isn't going to work for whatever barriers is put in place of social housing, that underspend has to be identified very quickly and put back into play for the rest of the executive quickly, because we've had it over the years with discretionary support being overspent, underspent. I agree that there needs to be a significant amount of money being put into housing. Oh my goodness, we've too many people in temporary accommodation and homeless. But maybe for after this, that we need to go back to the department just to say, look, there's an amount of money has been considered here. If it's received, wow, we look to see something wonderful happen with housing. Personally think that there will be a massive underspend on this, because while we've met targets up till now, it's only been because we've had less money than the actual targets have identified in the housing supply strategy. We're way under. So I think we just need to, as a committee, that's part of my scrutiny role, is just to make sure that where there's expenditure, it's spent, and if it can't be spent, it needs to be identified early through the financial processes, which they're all great at, to be released. Yeah.
Okay.
Just on Kelly's point, Chair, from my reading of the correspondence there, the Minister's answered that question in terms of capacity. You're not no, but he has answered that in terms of capacity. He's outlined that there hasn't been an underspend, that they have fulfilled the commitments that were made before were made, apart from the COVID years. So
Pam,
he's confident that...
Our targets are 2,000 houses a year, and we've built 1,700.
It's due to funding though.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
Chair members, please.
It has been through the funding.
So we should support the funding.
I'm not saying not to.
Okay, members, listen. I think we have a lot of other things to get to. So listen, can I then suggest that we are agreeing to write to the executive again and Clerk, could you read the proposal?
That this committee write to the executive to support the earmarking of the full funding requirements of the social housing development programme, which reflect the executive's own housing commitments as expressed both in its programme for government and its housing supply strategy. Members agreed?
Yep. Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, moving on then to item 5.3 is a response from Housing Rights to our query on whether there's a plan to commission updated research on the gap between local housing allowance and the availability of affordable private rented accommodation. Do members have any comments in relation to this item? Kelly?
Just to say, it's a really, really good piece of work, and I know that I have referred to this many times when you're looking at the impact that the freeze on the LHA has had. I'm just wondering, I don't know who funded this. Did they self-fund this, or was it another area that funded it? Because it would be very useful if we could ask the department to maybe consider reviewing this again as during the time of the multi-year budget, obviously at a time that's appropriate. We don't want to be doing reports too quickly, but this has been very useful, and it helps us when we're talking to Treasury about the freezing of the local housing allowances. So it's just to ask the department if they would consider funding at an appropriate time an update to this type of research.
Yeah, members content? Thank you. Okay, members, items 5.4 and 5.5 are both in relation to the Local Growth Fund, so I suggest we consider those together. Item 5.4 is a response from Matthew Patrick MP, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State, and item 5.5 is a response from the Department regarding our query around the impact of changes to the fund on the Department's ability to deliver its objectives. So Matthew Patrick MP has offered to meet with me in relation to this. Would members be content I take up that offer?
Yes,
Further correspondence was also received from Belfast Works Connect in relation to the Local Growth Fund and can be found at item 5.9 on page 5 of the table papers. Belfast Works Connect has offered to brief the committee in relation to this. Do members have any comments, or would be happy to schedule a briefing with Belfast Works Connect? Yeah, any other comment in relation to either of those, 5.4 or 5.5? Kelly?
I feel like we're being drawn into something here that we can't give any good responses to. As we see here, they're not coming to the committee to provide information on the Local Growth Fund or the decisions that Westminster has decided to make regarding that. And we know that our department here tried really hard to put Northern Ireland priorities into that funding so that it would be money that would concentrate on what we needed here. I know every day I get many emails through from organisations confirming the distress that this Local Growth Fund and the priority areas are having on them and the potential job losses we all know about. I don't know what to do with this, Chair. Having a briefing from another organisation that's telling us that their funding's in dire straits, whenever it's not our fund, and as much as our department would certainly love the impact that they achieve to continue on, it's a fund that's outside of our control. I know that some of the organisations have been putting pressure on the Minister and the department to fill the gap and to replicate this funding, albeit in a Northern Ireland way, but I don't know, unless that would be, we've already written to the Minister about this, so I genuinely don't know how much more as a committee we can do on this. It's an absolute disgrace what's happening to organisations, especially when we need the results that they're achieving. And I think it was last week that I asked for a letter to ask the Minister or the Department what the impact is of the loss of the Local Growth Fund. So maybe we need to wait for that.
Yeah, I think that might be a wise enough path, honestly, to be honest.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, Chair, no, I completely agree with Kelly. I think it's a huge frustration about what we do with it. And we have written to finance as well, haven't we, Clark?
Yeah.
So I don't know, have we written to the Finance Committee?
So every letter that goes to the Finance Minister or memo goes to the
Goes
committee.
to the committee
And
anyway.
the committee has corresponded with us that the Finance Committee are also looking at it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I think Kelly's right. I think we need to wait to see what their response comes back as.
Okay, item 5.6 then is a response from Sir Stephen Timms MP at DWP in relation.
Mark was looking at.
Mark's waving.
Mark, Tibronar, Mark, Lanneray, let it help.
Na haber, I hear you. I don't mention it, Chair, don't worry about it. It's just in terms of the issue we were discussing here, the Local Growth Fund, and I suppose it's an unrealistic ask or expectation for departments to fill the gap. Okay, but if we go back to the ESF, which was there obviously before the Shared Prosperity Fund, and which the Local Growth Fund is now going to be an ultimate replacement for, the match funding element of ESF, I think 40% of the money came from Europe and 60% came from local government, be it government departments here or even at times councils as well. But when we moved to the Shared Prosperity Fund, what happened to the match funding that was going in the ESF? Can we ask that?
Clerk, are you clear on what the ask
Yeah,
is?
so it's since the removal of the ESF funding. Since the removal of the ESF funding, what has happened to the match funding proportion, which would have originally come from the department?
Yes, because there's the gap that's now created by the change that are being proposed to the Shared Prosperity Fund vis-a-vis the Local Growth Fund. But the contribution from the executive and departments here seems to have, disappeared.
Finance are due to brief the committee next week, the finance officials in the DFC, Chair, if that might be helpful.
Might be an opportunity there, Mark. We have officials from DFC in next week, finance.
I would say it's potentially more applicable to other departments even than it is to DFC, but certainly no, I'll look forward to that next week and try and shed some light on that.
Okay. Yep. Okay, thank you. Finally then, members, item 5.7 is, sorry, 5.6.
Yeah.
5.6, there's a response from Stephen Timms at DWP in relation to the committee's concerns around the squeezed timeframe for committee scrutiny in relation to LCMs, particularly in relation to the universal credit removal of 2-child limit. It would appear that the committee's letters to Westminster are making some impact, given that Minister Stim's correspondence states that he welcomes that constructive correspondence on the matter of scrutiny around bills requiring an LCM. Members, any comments they wish to make, or content with that as noted? Finally, members, item 5.7 is correspondence from the Department regarding our request of 14th of January for the information provided by it to the Finance Department in relation to the draft budget allocation and the further request in relation to the Minister's position on the draft multi-year budget. And just to let members know, we're due a finance briefing next week. So, members, any comments in relation to that? It might be worthwhile getting a briefing from officials on that, on those various pressures. Members think scheduling a briefing at some point, yeah? Okay.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Whenever we're getting that briefing, I would really benefit from understanding, I suppose, what is the difference between inescapable and high priority bids, if that's possible.
Yep. Clerk.
We can provide those to the officials in advance, sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Agenda, right, that's everything then, members, on matters arising. Moving into correspondence. Agenda item 6, and as usual we'll proceed through the correspondence and draw items out in bundles and ask if members want to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item, or if you're content to confirm the step as proposed in the memo at page 6.1. Members, there are some invitations in correspondence and members should respond to those individually should you wish to attend any event. Item 6.7 is a memo from the Clerk to the Public Accounts Committee regarding a 12-month update on child poverty here in the North, and this is a timely update, I think, given today's briefings are on poverty here. Items 6.8 and 6.9 are requests from the Department to defer briefings on the pinch points of the housing supply strategy and a slight deferral on the closed briefing on the football fund. Are members content that both these briefs are rescheduled?
Disappointed, I think.
Yeah, particularly that housing supply strategy one, given the emphasis there's been on housing. That's particularly, but the members content in light of the request.
Content.
Okay, so that completes the correspondence bundle, and we're moving on now to today's briefing sessions. Agenda item 7, which is the poverty in NI 2025 report, oral evidence from the Joseph Brown 3 Foundation. I'll just check that we have all.
Yeah, they're just
witnesses.
outside.
Members, the briefing paper for the agenda item is at page 154 of your meeting papers, and I'd now like to welcome the following officials to our meeting.
Hi.
Hi, good morning. So we're joined by Ursula O'Hare, who is head of NI, Sheena McMullen, senior policy advisor, and Christine Allison, who is senior analyst. So delighted to have you here this morning, and thank you for coming to committee. And Ursula, I think it's yourself who's going to make a brief opening statement before we move to questions from members. So in your own time and when you're settled, Ursula.
Time and when I'm ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Give me a second here
No worries.
to get organised. Morning, everybody. And first up, thanks for the time today. We're very pleased to come to present the findings from our very recent Poverty NI report, and actually delighted that this has all been sequenced with the presentation you're going to have from the very aptly named Safety Nets team. I have no doubt there will be important synergies and connections across the two presentations. So let's start just with crystallising what we're talking about today. When we're looking at poverty in Northern Ireland, we're looking at a population almost the size of the city of Belfast living in poverty. And there are, of course, many reasons for that. The report, which I know you've had, and you have a shorter abridged briefing in your pack, digs into the detail behind that figure. And I would just say, if you have time, do have a look at some of the words that were shared with us by people who are really struggling to get by just now. It's worth a read. So let's turn then to what the report says. We've 3 key findings and some broad messages to share with committee today. The first is that we find stagnation. Things aren't changing. Progress that was being made has now stalled, and there has not been change over the last 5 years. And the result of that is that 330,000 people, that's 17% of the population, are living in poverty. And 1 in 4 children are living in poverty, and that's, I think, the most stark statistic. These statistics will not be, of course, unfamiliar to you. It's not simply the scale and the depth of poverty that's important. Our greatest concern, I suppose, is really with the persistence of poverty. So that's where somebody's been living in poverty for 3 out of 4 years. That kind of relentless experience of struggling day to day, because that has the most scarring impact. In Northern Ireland overall, that's 6% of the population, but again, the figure's higher for children. So that's 14% of children. And then when we step back and we take a sweep across Northern Ireland, what we find is that some places experience poverty more than others, and some groups are at greater risk of poverty. And again, this will not be unfamiliar to you. So when you look at the geography of poverty across Northern Ireland, we find that the 3 local council areas with the highest poverty rates are in order: Derry City and Strabane, local council, Causeway Coast and Glens, and rural Fermanagh and Omagh. So pay attention to that, because there are particular issues at a rural level that are important to address. But even in Belfast, and if you look at the graph we provided you in your brief, you'll see poverty is below the overall average, sitting at 15%. Underneath that, there's a figure of 1 in 3 children living in poverty in Belfast, in Belfast West. And that's the highest rate of poverty across Northern Ireland. Given your constituency work, I know that there will absolutely be no surprises in who's most at risk of poverty in Northern Ireland. That's lone parents, it's families with 3 children, which is about, kind of pretty much half of the families, half have 2 children, half families have 3 children, and people with disabilities and families with young children. And again, that points to where we might think about some policy interventions. I would flag to committee that we don't yet know enough about what the experience of minority ethnic communities in Northern Ireland is of poverty. Simply the data is not robust enough. That's something we are looking into. We want to resolve that, and we're very happy to bring that back to committee. So what's the message from those findings? It's that a step change is required. There is clearly, things are not yet moving at the scale and the pace that's required, despite our programme for government commitments. In real terms, that means that children who don't get a second chance at it are growing up in poverty with the increased risk that they will grow into poverty. And I think the biggest risk for all of us is that becomes normal. I remember when food banks started, you do. Many of you have food banks in your constituency. And I think what we're saying is that it's time to disrupt the cycle, and solutions are possible. So that's our first broad finding. Moving quickly on to the second main finding is that we are seeing a rise in in-work poverty. Work is not always a reliable route out of poverty. Good work matters for many reasons, and full-time work does remain a protective factor. But the key message in the report is that work isn't always working. And it's one of the biggest changes over the last 20 years, and it is a trend across the UK as a whole. So we find that a majority of people who are living in poverty in Northern Ireland are in working households. At 60% of working age adults living in poverty are in work. And I think the most staggering figure is that 64% of all of the children in poverty in Northern Ireland are living in a household where someone works. Christine can talk to you about the experience of low pay, insecure hours, insecure contracts, poor progression, and what all of that means. But there's a really alarming figure that almost half of all workers have experienced low pay in the last 5 years. So there's a low pay problem. Disability gap continues to be stubbornly persistent. Full-time carers are experiencing poverty, and I think we all know the issues for parents struggling to get access to work with affordable wraparound childcare. So the big message in this is that change is needed in the labour market. We need to dismantle the barriers to empower people to move into, and support them to move into good available work. So the local growth fund issue is really worth paying attention here. And I'll come back maybe to some of that in questions. But the third and final then main finding is that some of the warning signals are getting louder. Traditionally, housing costs have, as you all know, been an important buffer, a protective factor in Northern Ireland, meaning that poverty levels have historically been lower than in the UK, but the housing picture is changing, and you're well aware of this. You're well aware of 50,000 households on the social housing list and the change to the private rented sector and what that means in the number of tenants now in the private rented sector who are living in poverty. So there's a message about housing supply that's not just social housing, it is social housing, and it's also looking at rising pressures in the private rented sector. So overall, we're looking at a picture of weak financial resilience. 46% of people have less than £1,500 in savings. And the average family with 2 children who are living in poverty in Northern Ireland are trying to manage on a weekly income that's £120 below the poverty line. So that's our broad findings. Would you like me to move on to some of our thoughts about that, or do you want to take questions?
We'll come to questions, and then we can see if there's anything you want to wrap up then in terms of. But we'll come to questions, Ursula, and thank you very, very much. Thank you. Okay, Kathy. Okay. So I think first of all, your report has a particular focus on in-work poverty, which is very welcome, as it's often overlooked. Could you outline some of the reasons why in-work poverty is becoming more prevalent, and do you think that the Good Jobs Bill that is in progress at the moment is part of what you're indicating there is a necessary step forward? So,
do you want to start with that, or will I start with that?
I could outline some of the things that are happening in Northern Ireland, and then
I'll maybe speak to the Good Jobs
Bill. Yeah. I think Ursula has already mentioned about low pay. That was one of the things that really stuck out for me whenever I was looking at the numbers. 45% have experienced low pay over the last 5 years. But then I looked a bit more, about the kind of particular industries in Northern Ireland that have the highest rates of poverty, and agriculture really stood out then as one of the highest poverty rates, so 23% of those people working in that industry are in poverty. Retail and the arts, the poverty rate was 18%, also very high was hospitality at 15%, and 22% of people in poverty work in health and social care. And part of the real issue is that while low pay is a widespread issue, it's really concentrated in those particular industries. So 83% of people in hospitality are experiencing low pay, and 70% of those in retail. So those are really, really quite shocking numbers. There's also, other issues that we talk about in the report that are more specific to the industries themselves, like barriers to progression within health and social work, temporary contracts in retail and hospitality, and a kind of informality and unpaid labour in the arts. So then, as well as those kind of issues particularly around pay, we also have things that are really stopping people from being able to work the amount of hours that they need to be able to work now in order to make ends meet. And of course, Ursula touched a little bit on that, in terms of there's structural or personal issues related to caring or childcare, or illness and disability. But again, it's a kind of key feature of some of those industries here in Northern Ireland. And what that really means is that for a lot of people experiencing in-work poverty, they're kind of holding together lots of jobs and kind of have this patchwork of employment that causes a real difficulty for people managing their finances. So one retail worker described how, despite technically she had a full-time contract, her hours changed on a weekly basis so much that she had to have 3 jobs. 2 were in retail and 1 was in cleaning, in order to make ends meet. What that meant was she was getting paid for some of them hourly, some of them monthly. Her kind of, money came in at different times, very, very difficult to manage. There was also an actor who described a typical week of 5 different jobs. So that was performing, stage managing, working supermarket shifts, working bar shifts, doing kind of event setup and decor. And she talked about working usually 70 to 80 hours a week, but it was still kind of came out as less than minimum wage overall, particularly because of the rehearsal time and unpaid things that go along with the arts and that type of work.
Just if I pick up on some of that, then I think what you can see from what Christine has explained there is that, to come back to your question, Chair, specifically about the Good Jobs Bill. So some of the challenges there for somebody who's doing 3 jobs a week. How do you match childcare to that? How do you get the right support in at the right time, in the right place, in the right way, and predictably be able to plan to budget for that? So there's some. This goes to the point about the structural things that need to happen. And one of the other things we find in the report is that insecurity of employment is a real problem. So there is a low pay problem, but for many people, they experience insecurity in their employment position. This is where employment rights, strengthening the employment rights framework can make a difference, increasing the availability of flexible options for people and providing much greater levels of security in their employment relationship. That all matters. I think the big message about solutions in relation to poverty is that there is no, with one bound we're free solution. There are a number of things that need to move forward at the same time. Work needs to happen across the board. And I think maybe the last thing to say, so the Good Jobs Bill is really important. Strengthening employment rights is really important. And the real living wage was something that we specifically modelled to understand what would the impact be if everybody moved up to the real living wage on child poverty. And we find that it does make a difference. So there's an important conversation there to have with employers. I know the Real Living Wage campaign is working away at pace in Northern Ireland. So those are some of the things that really need to be considered in the labour market.
Okay, thank you. Final one from me for now is around we have previously expressed frustration as a committee about our ability to undertake effective scrutiny of cross-executive and cross-department priorities. We are told the Minister's lead responsibility for delivering measurable reductions in child poverty. Do you think that, and I think one of the things that concerns me in relation to the draft anti-poverty strategy was to touch back on that issue about rurality. There was very little reference to that. Gender, there was very little reference, but do you think that anti-poverty strategy, when it re-emerges out from the consultation process, is likely to be more or less likely to be successful with targets in place for achieving steps forward?
Thank you. That's an important question. I think the important thing to say here is that momentum matters. And, first things first, if poverty will take a North Star focus across the executive. Nothing less will do. So, taking first things first, we do need that strategy to drive change from the heart of government. That means it needs to set a direction of travel. So target does matter. And I think that's what we're looking for in an anti-poverty strategy that finally emerges from the executive later this year. That's really important for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it tells everybody what the scale of the executive's ambition is, and it allows, albeit perhaps imperfectly, it allows for that scrutiny and that accountability. That's such an important part of what government is for all of us. So, do I think targets matter? Yes, I do. I can understand some trepidation about targets, but actually, I think it's difficult to know where you're going if you don't set, this is our North Star, this is the target we want to achieve. You may need to course correct as you go. You almost certainly will need to course correct as you go. But momentum matters.
Thank you. So I'm coming now to our Deputy Chair, Kathy Mason. Go ahead.
Thanks very much for your presentation. Really, really interesting. I want to go back to the childcare aspect of it. And one of the documents that you guys created is like the holy grail for me, because I go back to it time and time again, and it's tackling disadvantage through childcare, the joint one with Quorum. I honestly refer to it all the time. And at the minute we've got the childcare strategy that's out for consultation. We obviously have the anti-poverty strategy. My fear is that there's not enough within the childcare strategy about tackling disadvantage through childcare, and then vice versa, there's not enough in the anti-poverty strategy around childcare and how we can use this as a tool. And we all know that the barrier for those on universal credit is one of the aspects of that. That 15% is still a barrier for a lot of people, often women, getting back into work. I've just really keen to hear your views on the strategies, and I'm sure Sheena is probably going to be yourself answering that.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Sheena to take that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, we're conscious, obviously, there's been a lot of work and a lot of different people working on this area for a long time, and including ourselves and our colleagues. I think our main thing is, we do have a laser focus on low income households, and we can't clearly see within the draft strategy due attention to those households, and we would like to see that is definitely a goal and an objective for us. With the same what you've just described, that there needs to be that connection with that anti-poverty lens in the childcare strategy, and that's what I think comes back to Ursula's point again about that North Star across the executive, that unless there's that anti-poverty lens and focus in different strategies that can make a difference in people's lives, whether it's in the labour market, in the Good Jobs Bill, whether it's through the childcare strategy, that is all hugely important. So again, it is an area of work that we're going to be continuing on, and we'll have more to say in coming months. And but at the moment, that research and that previous work still stands from our point of view, and we think there's more that could be done, in particular for low income households.
Again, just I suppose along the same thread around, we know the linkages between educational attainment and being a key driver of poverty too, and we know here, and academics across the board are unanimous in saying that we have a long tail of educational underachievement and the linkages between that and poverty. Some actually say we have the longest tail in Europe, but certainly when you look at the South, and the difference there. I'm just wondering, we have I'm not sure of the word to describe it, we have academic selection here, which puts us, aside from others. Have you guys done any research around that, and how that has an impact on poverty here?
Short answer to that is no, we haven't.
Okay.
But I would echo, however, your comments that about the importance of tackling educational underattainment, and of course that starts much earlier. That starts way back, before any child walks through a school door, and that's why tackling poverty amongst children and at an early stage really, really matters.
And again, I suppose the childcare strategy, because the
Matters
early
for
years is the key driver in that as well.
And I think what's really clear is that there is this complex web of actions that and interplay between all of them that are critically important, and that's why an anti-poverty strategy at the heart of government. No one department can do this. This is not any one department's job. This is everybody's job. It has to be at the heart of government. It has to be coordinated at that level and driven at that level. Thank you.
Thank you. Maurice, go ahead.
Thank you
please.
very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I represent the Causeway Coast and Glens, and it's very interesting reading for me, and I'm supposed for Mark as well. It also impacts in the Derry City and Strabane. Is the two areas of most poverty. Given that on many occasions I've raised it in the chamber, Mark has raised it in the chamber, and I think every elected member in East London, Derry and Foyle has raised it in the chamber, that the inequalities within the North West, that by accident rather than design, this executive appears to be concentrating all its efforts in and around the Greater Belfast area. For instance, the two largest employers we have is the Causeway Hospital and the University of Ulster, both through design, through the health department, and also through the finance, is concentrating all the eggs in the McGee basket to the detriment of Coleraine. And I fully support the expansion of McGee, by the way, but not at the expense of others. And the continual drip feed of services and provisions away from Causeway towards Antrim, and that's going to have a large impact on the employment in my area, given that most of the jobs in the Causeway Coast and Glens area are low paid, part-time, and in the hospitality and service areas. So that, I think, contributes an awful lot to the poverty that we experience in the North Coast. And if the executive could be more proactive in its regional balance efforts, I think that would be a way forward. Do you agree with that, or do you think there are other mitigating circumstances leading to and aiding poverty, especially child poverty, in the two areas?
So the short answer is I don't think we know enough about what the drivers of poverty are in those particular areas. Simply, we haven't drilled down into that. What I think I would say is how important a poverty lens is on informing and shaping policy choices. And in terms of where you can scrutinise some of this, I know a number of the councils. So Fermanagh, for example, Derry City and Strabane have already developed their own anti-poverty strategies. And I think that's a really important initiative. I think there's more to do to connect the local with the centre, so that the issues around where poverty is occurring most can effectively be addressed. But right now, Maurice, we haven't looked into what the detail on some of the issues are in those particular areas.
Could I just add to that, or please? Just Ursula is totally right in that we don't know enough, but just in terms of what we do know, there is, a real issue to do with local labour markets not being the same across Northern Ireland, and through the interviews you can see that remote and hybrid working, for example, is like a real lifeline for people who are juggling caring or living with illness or disabilities, or just live very, very far away from the kind of centres where the jobs are based. And so in the report we looked at jobs, the percentage of how many were advertised as hybrid or remote, and so in Causeway Coast and Glens it was only 0.6% of jobs there. So 0.6% in Causeway Coast and Glens, 1% in Mid and East Antrim, 2% in Armagh, compared with like a much higher percentage in Belfast. So that's just one aspect of the local labour market's not.
And just to remind members, we have a dedicated meeting with the councils on the 5th of March around to drill into some of those more
It would
specific.
be great to pick up on the connections.
Yeah, Chair, just one wee brief. I'll be brief. I take your point on hybrid working, etc., but in and around the Causeway Coast and Glens area, there is not enough employment available for that type of activity to take place. And unless the child poverty strategy works hand in hand with this executive to influence the executive to create a greater regional rebalance, I think we're always going to struggle with child poverty and poverty in the Foyle and Northwest area.
And you see the impact in figures, reflected in the figures.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a few members now indicating, so I'm coming to Sean, Melissa, Mark, and then Pam. Go ahead, please, Sean.
Thank you. I'll not give out to Morris for forgetting my part of the Causeway Coast and Glens. But it's something that I see.
Our neighbour.
It's something that I see quite a lot, even in terms of the seasonal element of the employment. But so I have a few. I just want to say thank you, as always. The work that JRF do, the data that is put out, the research is so high quality, and as the Vice Chair said, around your always been referring back to, so thank you so much for that. One of the first things that I want to pick up on is just that work first approach. So we have heard the Minister talk quite a lot about how that, you know, getting a job and working is obviously the main way of bringing people out of poverty. That some of those statistics are really shocking in terms of the 64% of children living in poverty are in a household with working parents. So it shows us that, as you said, I'm going to steal that, Ursula, the work is not working at times. So should our anti-poverty policy shift slightly from the job quality, income adequacy, rather than just job entry alone? Would that be your summary?
I think we'd say that. So we said that, you know, getting people, where people are able to get into and stay in good work, that matters in terms of their ability to build up financial resilience, and it matters for income adequacy. But we are not going to fix poverty without also putting our intention on strengthening the social security system. Both things have to happen, and within the social security system there is a need to, I mean, if you look across the UK, something like 2 in 5 people on universal credit are in work. So people rely, when they are in work, on the social security system. So you've got to move forward in tandem. And our evidence suggests that any job can be problematic for all of the reasons that Christine outlined: insecure, low pay. It's not an automatic that you move into. It's not automatic that you go from being on benefits into work. I mean, we know that. What you need to do is you need to focus on supporting people into good jobs. And I mean, and I said earlier, that's where the changes and the challenges in the local growth fund, I know are really worrying organisations at the moment. And there's work already underway in the department around disability strategy and the disability and work strategy, and that Sheena can speak to. But, you know, let's be clear, we'll not move forward unless we also look at strengthening the social security system so that it actually does what it says in the tin and supports people into work and to have sufficient income adequacy so that they can be able to live.
I think that feeds it perfectly into what my second question was going to be around mitigations. Are they in Northern Ireland holding the line rather than actually doing what we wanted them to do, which was to reduce poverty? Do we need to move away from mitigations and look at a focus on income boosting social security policy in your eyes?
So I'm going to say it's not an either or, and I actually want, it's a great question, because I do want to actually just say that it is worth recalling that, you know, the investment in mitigations and the difference that's made, and I think this executive should be really proud of the difference that it's made to people by stepping up into those mitigations and what's been achieved since. And you're going to see this with the abolition of the 2-child limit, which all of the parties have supported because we've mitigated the benefit cap. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that we are at the stage where mitigations are no longer required. They are absolutely critical. The mitigation of the benefit cap, the mitigation of the social security, the social sector size, the bedroom tax, continue to be key in protecting people from poverty. And it's also now time to look at, but we need to move the dial. So if we're going to move the dial, what are the income boosting measures that can now be taken? So for example, we modelled what a child payment would look like, looking at taking the example of the Scottish child payment, which is rolled out at the minute to something like 320,000 kids So, you know, we took a model that's in place and that's working. So, and we know that income boost, that money that would go to help people maybe with childcare costs or other essentials, would make a difference, and it would reduce the child poverty level by the end of the decade. And that's an investment. So those are the choices ahead of us.
And I think to hold your North Star and the maritime analogy, it's that point of that rising tide lifts all boats. And I think if we are looking to actually raise particularly children up with child payment, has that been something that the modelling has shown, is that probably the most effective in terms of tackling child poverty in the view of this research?
I think our view at the moment is that, I mean, you know, we're clear a child payment will not and is not the only answer. Mm-hmm. But if you're the kind of structural change that's called for, we acknowledge that's going to take time to yield results. And my point is that there is a generation of children who do not have that time. Yeah. They are, you know, this is their moment. And if we fail to meet the moment for them, then, you know, we will continue to replicate what we have. And let's be under no illusions. Poverty is not cost neutral. I mean, you have the evidence of that from the Northern Ireland Audit Office report. It's £1 billion a year to sustain our current child poverty levels. There's a report out, I think, today that looks at the overall cost of poverty in the UK with eye-watering figures. So, you know, it's not cost neutral, either economically, in the health sector, in education, socially. You know, poverty is an economic issue, it's a social issue, it's an education issue, yep. And it's costing, and those costs will continue to escalate. So it's time for choices.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I have a ream of other questions, but I'll organise a meeting with yourselves.
Thank you, Sean. Melissa Lallery.
Well, Patrick Overleg agus buíhas hanyad Ratchis Foster. Thank you for your statement as well. You're all very welcome here today. As someone who was reared in poverty, and at that time it was probably much more widespread, even though for many of us we didn't know it, because at the end of the day we probably always had, we'll say, food on the table at least anyway. Sometimes it might just have been potatoes when it wasn't Lent, but exactly, many of the family was reared on them at the same time. But when you do hear stories, and I know that you alluded to that, Ursula, at the outset, and reading your document here as well too, when families at times haven't food on the table, it just shows you how stark, in fact, the problem is. Now, of my generation at that time too, the way that people escaped poverty as such, they got on the emigrant boat. And much of the young people that lived in West Tyrone and areas like Castlegar, where I came from, that was exactly the only option that they had. And in addition to that, the other option was our commitment to education. And we knew too that within education it was the only way you could escape the poverty trap in many respects. So I was a wee bit surprised whenever you said that you hadn't much detail on that issue of education at the present time. In terms of, we'll say, the likes of transfer tests and so on, that clearly disadvantages a whole lot of people. So I'd wonder just maybe, is there any intention for you to actually look at that down the line?
So I'm going to say we've had the full team in place just since June. So give us time.
You sorry, I've
give us time.
Give us time, right.
We have a big programme of work, I should say, for committee, because this may or may not, and we hope it is of interest to you, but we are currently in the middle of a project to understand what the poverty of disability is in Northern Ireland, and that's directly as a consequence of our findings in the report. We are also wanting to understand what the experience of minority ethnic communities are, because quite simply, we couldn't get the robust data on that. And we want to then look at childcare. So we have a big programme of work ahead. We know that education really matters, but it's going to go back to what I said, Militia, before you walk through the school gate matters.
I understand that. In addition, just and you alluded there to how Derry and Staban Council area is probably top rank whenever it comes to the likes of child poverty and so on. And yet, all will say that we sell ourselves here in the north of Ireland as a country that has a low wage economy. and to use that in order to attract, we'll say, investors and the likes of it into the area. Would that actually concern you? Because I do think that, again, too, in the northwest, that probably for many of our working population, that they're condemned to this whole concept that they would boast about those that sell the north of Ireland as being a low wage economy.
I think I would say in response to that, that low wages that don't adequately deliver households with the security they need is a problem that we experience elsewhere in the system.
One final comment maybe you might have on it too, just is that I noticed that in Britain at the present time that the actual gap has narrowed there in terms of the number of people who are finding themselves, say, in child poverty and the likes of it. Do you have any notion of why that might be the case, and why has it not been sort of reciprocated here in the north of Ireland?
I'm not sure.
There's just a recent report that's come out there to say that for child poverty and that in Britain, that the statistics have improved, put it like that, that the amount of people that find themselves in child poverty is a lot reduced.
Yeah, I know what you're, yes. So we find that, we anticipate there will be a drop in the level of child poverty as a consequence of the decision to abolish the two-child limit. So we looked at that whenever the Westminster government made that decision earlier in the year, and we really welcome that decision. That's absolutely the right move. So there will be a drop there. We remodeled some of our work on foot of that to understand what the impact of that would be in Northern Ireland. So the two-child, and it's a really important example of how policy, poverty is amenable to policy. Policy can make a difference in terms of driving and shaping what our future looks like, and we have to create that future.
Thank you. Mark, go ahead online there, Mark. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, ladies, for coming in. Most informative, as always. Most of the points have actually been touched on. Just in terms of the Chair had touched on the issue of the Good Jobs Bill, and in terms of, suppose, legislative vehicles to help tackle tackle poverty, and the geography of poverty that you've outlined there. My party colleague Sinead McLaughlin's bringing forward a private member's bill on regional balance. Now, the remit of this should filter in and factor into the decision making by every department that at times seems to penalise poverty rather than work to prevent it and bring people and areas out of it. Now, within DFC's remit, it's interesting in terms of the areas there, the vast majority of them at the top of those charts that you don't want to be top of are in receipt of rate support grant. I was wondering, has there been any analysis done of the impact of, particularly, I suppose, given the number of, or the percentage of people in poverty, 64% you say households have someone in work and they're still in poverty, the impact of domestic rates on poverty, is that seen as one of, I suppose, a multitude of driving factors?
So not something we've looked at. Mark, so I can't give you the kind of robust evidence-based answer I would want to.
No, but it is interesting because then the ratepayers in those poorer areas that you've identified there are actually paying more in domestic rates. And the government, the executive used to subvent a lot more through rate support grant support to councils to close that gap, so they wouldn't have to put such a burden on ratepayers. But now that's been reduced over the last number of years from maybe 15 million to 3 million across the councils, which is impacting definitely on people's ability to pay the rates, along with everything else they have to pay for. The the draft anti-poverty strategy, there was a lot of focus, I suppose, on what other departments are, well, particularly one, education could do, would do, and is already doing to help tackle poverty. Childcare is a big issue, obviously. Has there been any analysis of the effectiveness of measures or steps that the executive have already taken in that regard?
Not so far, Mark, but that is definitely on our agenda. As Ursula mentioned, our work plan does look at childcare, and we're really also seeking to work with those who've already been working on the area, and they flagged some of those issues. So it's definitely something we'll be looking at in the very near future, and I'm happy to feedback when we have concrete data to share.
And then finally, I suppose it's a point more than a question. It would be around the cost of poverty. That's something I've always been keen to push more, sort of maybe cause more people to sit up and take notice and think, yeah, something does need done about this. This is affecting me. This is affecting all of us. But I think people kind of switch off when they hear about poverty, often when they're probably in poverty themselves, many of them. But no, thank you for your attendance today and your continued good work on this hugely important issue.
Thank you, Mark and Pam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your attendance today at committee. Clearly, you're doing an awful lot of good work, and it's very clear it's very, very complex. There's many issues involved in poverty, and it's something we all need to tackle. I suppose what I would ask you is, given the severe financial strains that we have across government, across all departments, and I agree with you, this is an issue for all the departments. It's not just for one department. It's very multifactorial. But I would ask you, given those strains, and we know there isn't an abundance of money to can't do everything we want to do, to act against and to try and bring people out of poverty. But if you were prioritising two main points or two main parts of reform, what would they be? What would be your top two absolutes that you think should happen to try and lift people out of poverty?
You're right, there are always many calls on resources in the world of finite budgets. Ultimately, it's all about political choices. I said that we would want the anti-poverty strategy to set the executive's ambition, because that then will shape the fiscal choices. And to answer your question very directly, we need to focus on looking at what our evidence tells us. We know we will not move the dial on child poverty, which is 24%, 1 in 4 children, without an investment in our social security system. So we need to invest in our social security system to give parents the headroom and children the chance that they need. We miss it, and we've missed it. So that's the most important thing. And I think it's very hard to pick just two, isn't it?
It is very.
It's very hard to pick two. I think, so what I would say is that what's really important, and this is why you need this whole of government coordination of this real holistic approach, is to be really clear, what are we doing? It's like on a motorway, some lanes move faster than others at different times. You can't do everything everywhere all at once, but I said momentum matters, so we need to start somewhere, and I think it starts somewhere. Child poverty really jumps off the page to us, and particularly, Pam, because of what we said about that persistent poverty, that has the most scarring effect. It's hard for people to recover from that. So I'd start there, and taking that motor lane analogy, start to map out when are we moving in different lanes across the piece. It's long-term work. The anti-poverty strategy is 10 years that could shape our agenda, but fundamentally, this is more even than the anti-poverty strategy. This is what the next programme for government should be focused on. Because if you do fix poverty, you're dealing with housing, you're dealing with work, you're dealing with childcare, you're dealing with all of the issues, you're dealing with health. People talk about this as a social determinants of health approach. Fine, if that is a way of engaging with the impact on health, bring it in that way. We need a target in the next programme for government that will drive those hard choices. And they are hard choices, but that's what politics is.
Thank you for that. And I suppose, given your number one would be that investment in social security, how do we, as a devolved assembly, how do we affect change in that? Given that the monies are coming from Westminster, we know every day. I know the finance minister is battling with the Treasury for more and to get to catch up on underfunding and all the rest of it. So we know that's an ongoing day by day battle. So how do we, as a devolved government, how do we make that our top priority if we don't have actually literally the funds to do that?
I think in response, Pam, I'd say that the exciting thing about devolution is the ability to really have it realise its own potential. And you know, politicians in Northern Ireland are really proximate to their community, so they know what matters most to people on the ground, and taking that evidence and utilising. I mean, we do have powers in social security. I understand that, you know, there is, of course, we operate within a parity principle, but we do have powers with social security, and this executive, I mean, I said this before, should be really proud of what it did 10 years ago when it put in place those mitigations. It's about making the choice first, the political choice first, and then matching that to your fiscal choices. There is a fiscal choice to be made. I am not ducking that. I'm very clear about that. But it's a fiscal choice, it's a social choice, it's a political choice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ellie?
I've just a very quick one because everybody else is asking wonderful questions. You've just talked there about political choice. 2028 is not too far away. Okay, it's in the next mandate, but the mitigations cliff edge is in 2028. Would it be one thing that we could do as a government is to decide now? Now, I asked questions of the Minister of what monies have been put into the draft budget, you know, the bid for the draft budget, and it does include an amount for mitigations post 28. But is that something that we could take and do now that's proactive, is to say the mitigations are there until such times as social security catches up with us?
Great question. I absolutely would urge all of the executive and this committee in particular, given its role in relation to the social security system, to be in planning now. I said in response to Pam's question, this is long-term work. This requires nothing other than long-term, clear, concerted work. Planning needs to start now, and that's why I'm going back to it again. But, you know, getting the right anti-poverty strategy that will shape those choices that politicians will have to make now and over the next decade and beyond is worth the price.
Thank you. Okay, members, thank you for that, and thank you, Ursula and Sheena and Christine, for the very, very important and some really interesting evidence and concepts there, I think, and very helpful for our committee. But thank you for your appearance today, and we look forward to touching base with you again.
Thank you very much. And just to say, we're really happy to, as we bring evidence, we'll bring it to you. And if there's any way in which we can support the work of the committee, please, you know where we are, just get in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, August Armour. So members, I'm going to propose there that well, first of all, can I check, is there any follow-up actions that members wish to highlight or suggest?
I would really like to see if we could get even a briefing around the Good Jobs Bill. Would it be possible to write to the Economy Department and even just get whether, I don't know whether we can ask their officials or whether it's something from the department. I think that would be really useful to get an understanding of, because that is going to be such a huge element of the anti-poverty work.
From an anti-poverty lens, yeah.
Yeah, anti-poverty lens.
Our members agreed, yeah.
Sean or Kelly, sorry.
Just write to the department to ask what preparations are being put in place to consider the mitigations renewal or end in 2028. Because that's part of this budget period. So.
Yeah. Members content? Was that a suggestion? Pam?
It was just on the Good Jobs Bill. We're asking for a briefing on it.
Yeah, just through anti-poverty lens.
Has it been published?
I'm not aware if the bill has been introduced, but there may be a pre-legislative briefing.
just
Even the
curious.
work, even the work that's going on behind the scenes around it.
See if officials have
Yeah,
have
I can
information they can
ask the
share.
question.
See if officials have
Members are
information
agreed.
they can
Yeah.
share with committee at this stage. Yeah. Okay, well, I think seeing as we have our next witness in place, we'll move on to agenda item 8. So, which is around, are the members content with those actions? Oh. Moving on to agenda item 8 then, Safety Nets, Social Security for Families in a Devolved UK report. We're hearing oral evidence from the Child Poverty Group. The papers for the agenda item are page 284 of the meeting papers. The Child Poverty Action Group is working jointly with academics for the Safety Net project. Mark is one of the country leads for the project and is here today to brief the committee. I now welcome to the meeting Mark Simpson, Senior Lecturer, School of Law in Ulster University. Mark, you're very welcome. Will you go ahead and make an opening statement and then we'll get the members' questions. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, members, for the invitation to speak. Yeah, as you said, I'm Mark Simpson. I'm a Senior Lecturer in Law at Ulster University and a co-investigator on the Safety Nets study. This is about a 4-year project being funded by the Nuffield Foundation. It involves 7 universities, it involves Child Poverty Action Group, Resolution Foundation, and importantly it also involves a group of experts by experience, people who receive social security benefits themselves, who have oversight of the project, who play a role in carrying out our field work and in the analysis of our findings. I know you've got our briefing from last May in your packs. Things have moved on a little bit since then, and I'm obviously happy to talk about that, but I'll give you a wee bit of an overview first. So our aim in Safety Nets is to be the first comprehensive study of the relationship between social security, devolution and localisation, spanning all 4 UK countries. And it reflects our view that the impact of devolution and localism in this space is not well enough understood. There's not enough sharing of experiences and expertise between countries and also between levels of government within the UK. And we're trying to fill that knowledge gap by looking at the minute at, first of all, the extent and the effect of devolution and localisation on social security, through a series of devolved conversations in which we explore how the differences that do exist between social security in different places are regarded by people who receive benefits themselves. And we're also doing a deep dive study on local discretionary welfare, so that's in the Northern Ireland context, discretionary support, discretionary housing payments, but also the equivalents to those in the other UK countries. And you'll see the main reports from each of those work streams appear in the summer. Phase 2 then from September is going to take a close-up look at how elected representatives and officials in different countries view the emerging differences and the future prospects for devolved social security. Many of you will likely be hearing from me again when that work kicks off. We're also going to be setting up a commission on the future of social security and devolution, which will be led by our experts by experience. They'd produce their own reports, setting out their own views on what could be done, making use of the devolved and local powers that there are. And we'll be running a series of social security policy labs, which will bring together people with different forms of expertise from different parts of the UK to share their experiences and to share their ideas. And there's a basic paradox that we're trying to resolve through this work. If you look to the devolved conversations that we've held, on the one hand we've got this perception that it's unfair that people in different places receive different levels of support. At the same time, there's a view which we've heard again and again in these exact words, that some of the things that have been done in social security at devolved level, some of the innovations that have taken place are a beacon of hope compared to some of the recent UK level trends that we've seen. So if there was no devolution, that perceived unfairness wouldn't exist, but then the beacon of hope also wouldn't exist. So that's something that we'll be teasing out. You know, as a team, we don't take a position as such on whether devolution and localisation are good or bad in inverted commas. But what is clear is that devolution makes a difference. You've been hearing some of that from the JRF team in the previous session. So in 2023, an out-of-work couple with 4 children would typically have received from Social Security about £22,000 if they lived in York, £32,000 if they lived in Belfast, or £37,000 if they lived in Glasgow, which is a huge difference. And in the same year, the relative child poverty rate was 24% in Northern Ireland and 23% in Scotland, compared to 30% in Wales and 31% in England. So more generous benefits at devolved level are not the full explanation for why that's the case, but they are a partial explanation. The Scottish child payment, for instance, that Ursula has mentioned, is credited with bringing about a 4 percentage point reduction in child poverty in Scotland, so it's making a contribution. So what we ultimately see is an opportunity to look at things that have been tried in certain parts of the UK and that other places might want to learn from. And that goes for some things that we know the committee's been taking an interest in recent weeks, fostering an all-government approach to addressing poverty, the concerns that the Minister has shared with you about funding for discretionary support in the coming year, and indeed the impact on and the relationship between the existing welfare supplementary payments and the removal of the 2-child limit on universal credit. And I guess it's important to stress, looking at other parts of the UK is not going to tell us immediately what Northern Ireland should be doing in any of these spaces, but there are examples that we can look at, and there's evidence that we can gather on some of the strengths and maybe some of the pitfalls of certain approaches, and that's the sort of evidence that studies like ours can provide and will continue to. So I'll just finish by saying we're quite a big project. I'm just one of many members, and I've been given a pretty broad brief for today, so please ask about whatever you're interested in. I'll do my best. If there's something that you ask about that someone else on the team would be better placed to respond to, I can always come back to you in writing later on.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. So I suppose first one from me, and then I'll come to members. Do you, in your experience or your knowledge in relation to the anti-poverty strategy, will, in your experience, that be able to effectively tackle child poverty if it doesn't include clear targets and dedicated social security levers, given the evidence on what has worked that you're presenting on what has worked elsewhere?
Well, I mean, I was a co-author of one of the consultation responses on the draft strategy, and the point myself and a couple of Ulster colleagues, Ciara Fitzpatrick and Gráinne McKeever, made in that was very much that the strategy does need to have targets, and that's, I'll come back to you in a moment about the importance of targets in driving progress, but simply at a fundamental level, the judicial review that the Committee on the Administration of Justice brought of the absence of an anti-poverty strategy, one of the court's findings in that was essentially that there needs to be a measurable end to the strategy for it to fulfil the duty in the Northern Ireland Act, and also that there needs to be a consistent definition of objective need. Neither of which we feel are sufficiently present in the draft strategy as it is at the minute. So, and from that legal point of view alone, we think that there's a need for measurable targets in it. But going beyond that, in terms of the fulfilling legal duties is one thing, but what's the point of the targets, and what do they achieve? If you look at the approach in Scotland, where there are targets to reduce child poverty, not only in a strategy but set down in law, similar to the former UK Child Poverty Act, we can see that these do have an effect on policy choices. So the Scottish child payment, which I've mentioned, was designed with a specific brief to achieve a specified reduction in the rate of child poverty as a step towards achieving the targets that the Scottish Government's required to meet in law. There's other examples in Scotland, like the Fairer Scotland duty, which requires all public authorities to assess whether their strategic decisions reduce inequalities of outcome associated with socioeconomic circumstances. There's a similar duty in Wales. So, any significant policy decisions that are made in Scotland are going through effectively a poverty-proofing exercise in the way that decisions here would be going through Section 75 processes. So, these things do matter, and I would agree that it would strengthen the strategy if it was changed in that way.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go firstly to Sian. Go ahead, Sian.
I got really distracted by something that you said there, and I was starting to automatically take notes. Thank you so much for your presentation, Mark. I am particularly looking forward to the deep dive into the discretionary funding. I think that's something that has been brought to my attention. It's something I've been very worried about by a few comments that the Minister has made over the past few times that he's spoken about it, particularly around discretionary support and how if he can't fulfil his duty to statutory obligations, then discretionary support might be the first to go. So you said the summer that was coming out, around summer?
Yes, I would expect so. I mean, we've got an initial briefing on localised social security in the round, which is already on the project website. But yeah, we'll have a big state of local welfare report coming in the summer. Okay,
I really look forward to that. Around the targets, I suppose one of the issues around targets, I am fully on board. I think that was the biggest omission for me anyway out of the anti-poverty strategy, was the lack of measurable targets. How do you think they should be measured and reported? Because this is obviously cross-executive in other jurisdictions in terms of those targets. Is there any insight into how the data is brought down and how it's reported on? Sorry, I don't know whether that's
you're probably asking me one that's that's a bit outside my own area of expertise. I can ask and come back on it. And I think the existence of the targets, it provides that sort of North Star that Ursula's been talking about. And it's I guess it becomes a focus for cross-departmental working, which I guess compared to Scotland or Wales, where you don't have departmental governments, things are a bit more siloed in Northern Ireland, so it's important to have that common focus, and that it can be achieved through targets. It can be achieved through other duties as well. Both Scotland and Wales have in different ways brought the Convention of the Rights of the Child into domestic law, and that can have a similar effect. In terms of how they're actually measuring how they get to them, I guess in the Scottish child poverty targets, it's quite simple. They're using the Family Resources Survey and the same poverty measures that are used across the UK, and that's one particular target that can be measured. But in terms of I guess without knowing what the targets would be, it's difficult to say how they would be measured. And as I say, it's probably something that other people, maybe the CPAG members of the project, would be better versed in anyway.
Okay, thank you. I think we're all going to be using Ursula's North Star analogy going forward. In terms of parity, I know that was something, obviously, I think that's been constantly used really as a bit of a limiting factor and a boundary. Do you think that at times it's a reason not to act, or has it has the Scotland model, where they've broken parity, has that allowed much more freedom than we're seeing in Northern Ireland to actually respond to our own very specific needs?
Well, there are important differences in Scotland. Social security is only partly devolved, so they're only focusing on certain areas of the system. There was a decision taken, which is partly possible because of the greater economies of scale that exist with a bigger population, that Social Security Scotland would set up all of its own systems, so they're not dependent on DWP changing its systems every time they want to do something different. That's not to say that there aren't constraints, which there definitely are because of the interactions. They're quite dependent on the DWP for data in determining entitlement to a lot of devolved benefits. So it's not the case that Scotland is unconstrained, but they do have, I guess, more favourable circumstances in various ways. They have more fiscal autonomy. They have higher levels of income tax. Some environmental taxes are higher, so they've got more money at their disposal that way. Also get a better deal out of the Barnett formula, arguably, which is not to say there are no possibilities in Northern Ireland, but it's a little bit more challenging in various ways. I think there was an important, there was a big psychological barrier around parity and departures from it, which my feeling is probably is not there to quite the same extent. We saw with the winter fuel payment that an extra payment was made in Northern Ireland with actually relatively little fuss if you compare to the agonising that there was over whether the initial mitigations should be introduced. So I think that what tells us is that if there's if you've got if you've got a political desire to achieve something and the resources to achieve it, that parity need not necessarily be a barrier in the same way that it would once have been perceived to be. But I do think that in terms of the use of the DWP systems and also the funding model that exists here, it would be foolish to say that it's not an issue. But I think it's it doesn't have to be the end of the conversation, and I don't think it is the end of the conversation anymore in the way that it would once have been.
Thank you, Mark. That's really useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. When will those joint research labs that you referenced, when will those discussions be likely to take place?
So that's in phase 2 of the project, which will be kicking off from September. But obviously, a certain amount of lead in terms of getting things put in place. There'll be another year and a half to go to run on the project at that stage. So probably certainly over the next year from September onwards, you should start to see some developments.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Pam.
Chair, just a small on the back of Shannon's questions there, and you were talking about Scotland there. And clearly they've gone a slightly different place and have kind of broken part of parity and not all of it. And there more money is being paid out in terms of child payment and stuff. But just for clarity, so they have changed their tax, income tax
Yes.
rates. So people are paying more in order to fund those differences, isn't that right?
Well, people are paying more income tax. It's it will be funding various things across government, and there will be different decisions being made about what areas are prioritised for spending too. Not all of which I'll be on top of, but in various ways the money is found.
The income tax level. So in comparison to Northern Ireland, people are paying more in income tax in Scotland.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mark, for that presentation. Some interesting information in there, and very useful to the committee in that respect. So thank you. Okay, members. Yeah, go ahead, Mark. Okay, members. Any follow-up actions members wish to outline or seek there? Are members content then? Okay, thank you, members. So moving on to agenda item 9, forward work programme. A copy of the forward work programme is at page 318. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme? Kelly?
Yeah, I know that just looking at next week, if the pinch points of the housing supply strategy is going to be deferred, it's going to be a bit light. a note that we should be getting by the start of next week a written update on departmental primary and delegated legislation. Is there merit, given Emer's scary discussion with us about how much time's left, that we have some sort of a planning session just to look ahead? Because I'm aware there's private members' bills, however many may make it here, just about going forward, and it's just I'm a wee bit concerned about our ability there.
Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, so Chair, if you don't mind, I can seek an update from the department. We have asked for pre-legislative briefings on each of the bills we are to expect, and are awaiting dates for those to be confirmed. Okay. Also, since this forward work plan went into the pack, we've received 4 SL1 proposals just in the last 24 hours. And I will liaise with the DALO trying to get briefings in on those next week. But I'm happy to try and schedule maybe an hour for strategic work planning if members...
It would be useful. I think it's just, I know Andy, Mark and myself know what it's like in this committee coming up to the end of a mandate, and the amount of legislation that hits us, it's non-stop. Yeah.
Okay, members content with that proposal? Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 10, members, any other business? Do members of any other business they wish to raise? Pam?
Sure, yes, it was just to ask if we haven't already done this, could we get an update on the active ageing strategy? I'd like to know if it's being refreshed, or if there's any new action plans or timelines coming out of that. But I'm not aware.
I haven't asked recently.
Okay,
the team checked for me this morning. Yeah.
Okay.
So we can check.
You can seek an update, and what was that?
So
if it's being refreshed, did you say?
and ask whether it's been refreshed as well.
Okay.
Members agreed, yeah.
Thank you.
Agenda item 11, date, time and location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 26th of February 2026 in room 29, Parliament Buildings here. For my August members, I was sure.
Record time.
Short to the time.
Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.